Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Building Our World podcast. Today I had the pleasure of being joined by Oliver Welter, the co-founder and CTO at Nia Health. Now, Nia Health is really helping to reduce the burden and stigmatization of people with chronic skin conditions with their award-winning app. Oliver and his team are a massive example of the advancement of technology and, more importantly, how the use of this technology for the greater good makes a real difference to people's lives. In this chat, we talk about his intrinsic motivations to make a difference using his tech skills. We also discuss his transition from being a head of engineering at an established Berlin startup to then becoming a co-founder. And then towards the end, we talk about the Berlin Tech Hub itself, his views on emerging technologies, and also his advice for any aspiring tech founders out there. We had a lot of fun. He's a really smart guy, and I hope you get some amazing value from it. Enjoy. So, Oliver Welter, co-founder and CTO at Nia Health. It's Monday morning. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Superb. No, thanks for coming on. So I wanted to start in a world now that sometimes feels like it's going a bit wrong, and especially if you watch the news, climate change, politics, things like that. But one thing I'm always really, really optimistic about is the advancement in technology. And more importantly, the advancement in technology for the greater good, technology that is making a difference. And your company, Nia Health, 100% falls into that category. Now, you'll probably explain this a lot better than me. So it would be great if you could just start by explaining your role, who you are, and a brief sort of description about what Nia Health are doing at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. My role in the company is being the CTO, and together with my two co-founders, Dr. Alnebari and Tobias Seidel, we started the business in 2018. And our focus is developing a platform for people with chronic skin diseases to get something like a digital companion to support them on their journey to get the right treatment. And we looked into different kind of diseases, and at the moment we started with two: atopic dermatitis, or atopic eczema, so to say, and psoriasis. And when we talked with a lot of patients and families, because one of the main issues is that small children are suffering from atopic dermatitis, so it's more or less not only the patient, also the whole family taking care about this issue. We learned that it's very highly individual and multifactorial. And one of the things you normally experience when you go to a doctor is that they don't have a right therapy at hand for you to just say, take this pill and you will be good. It's more about understanding yourself and getting your individual treatment together with a doctor. And very important part of that is understanding how the disease works and how it affects your body, and to track your skin over time. So documentation with photos, or there are different clinical scores available giving you a quantity and a quality to your disease, which helps you to discuss with your doctor the next steps of your treatment. And we understood that this has been already highly educated and supported by doctors already, but there was no real digital technology around to support that. And we decided to develop that. And our first product, Nia, was launched in December 2019. And when you open up the application at the moment, you get a clinical validated curriculum we developed together with the Charité, which has already been for 25 years together with a group here in Germany being active to educate patients. And we migrated that into the digital realm, and you as a patient get now more and more understanding about how this disease works and what you can deal in certain situations with. And on the other side, you can track your skin, your skin process, and get all the information very much aggregated for your next doctor's visit. And you mentioned technology. We also saw a big opportunity here working with the data directly, because what we're seeing is actually that one of the biggest issues you're normally having is you want to understand your triggers. So atopic dermatitis works in flare-ups. So over time, your skin will rapidly change. And which is very important for yourself is to understand what is your personal triggers. And we saw technologies like machine learning being very adequate for analyzing text information and images to get better understanding about what's happening currently and support the patient in that way. So yeah, that's what we have done the last year, more or less. And we realized that what we're doing with atopic dermatitis is also applicable to other skin conditions like psoriasis. And we started with that as well. And at the moment, that's why I'm calling it a platform. We are developing that specific per indication, but then we're generalizing it to the extent that we have another spin-off for a different indication field.
I see. They always say that super interesting because I mean they always say if you want to know about a disease or like a rare disease, you don't ask the doctor, you ask the parent or the spouse of someone who's going through it because they would have done all the research, read every article and everything like that. Um, why do you think that doctors weren't able to help in such an individualized way? Is it because it is a skin disease, but it's not like a cancer or something like that. So it's not seen as something that can have like extensive research into it, or there's other priorities. But skin diseases are debilitating psychologically for a lot of people. So why do you think it's not being taken care of by the doctors, and why do you think your technology therefore is needed?
So maybe to make some points clear, so we're not a substitute for a doctor. Our goal is to support the patient in the best way to have the right discussion with the doctor. So the doctor at the end is the one who's defining the diagnosis and the therapy, and we come and play after the diagnosis has been made and during the long ordeal of the therapy, which can be up to 10 years or even longer. So I think doctors are doing a great job, but they can't really push all the educational stuff into the head of the patient, because normally what you're seeing is that you have a checkup every 3 months and then you have a couple of minutes time to discuss the progress. And normally what happens, the doctor is asking, so how have you been for the last 3 months? And then the patient is trying to remember that. And we all know how this doesn't work out. So you need that kind of companion to have very good information you can share in a very short amount of time with your doctor so that the doctor can do the right assessment based on the data. Plus, there have been programs around educating patients how to work with the disease on a daily basis. But to be honest, a doctor cannot really provide that kind of feedback, which takes multiple hours. So it's more or less up to the patient to inform themselves or take part as patient information programs. But the problem is that this is not very much available all over the place. So here we step in and support them with a mobile solution, which is, I think, more acceptable to our current environment, which is, you don't have to go anywhere. You can consume the information when you want and when you have time. And that is really the big benefit that we can support here. So we are seeing ourselves more as empowering the patient during the disease. And I think one other point we have seen a lot discussing with doctors and with patients, that there's a big misunderstanding at the beginning, because when you have a condition, you're going to a doctor, you're expecting that you get a pill and then you're done with it. And that's not how it works. So there's also a big expectation management issue on patient side, because they're going to a doctor, they don't get the treatment they're expecting, and then they're switching doctors. And that's how this so-called the doctor hopping. So a patient goes to a lot of different doctors, and all the doctors can just see at the moment the current condition and give their best of advice. And then again, expectation management, it doesn't work out. And again, switching doctors. And what we're doing here, we are also, by educating the patient, we're giving the whole thing a different chant, and we educate in the way that you have to be patient about it, that you have to give the therapy a try and then see how it works over a longer period of time. And that's, I think, very, very different compared to other diseases, especially chronic diseases, where you just have to be patient and try out things. And then just if you have a flare-up, it doesn't mean that your medication was bad. It was just you have a flare-up because something happened in your life and you have to adjust to that.
So it's really important to find out the triggers of flare ups and adjusting people's sort of lifestyles. It seems that your app is is that's where its greatest benefit is at the moment.
Yeah, totally, yes. So that's what we're seeing. And also, you have to imagine that the biggest group of our users at the moment are young mothers having children in the age of 1 month to 7 years, suffering from the disease. So you can just imagine having your first child, how difficult the situation is already, and then having a child who's scratching themselves all night long, and you cannot really act on that. So it's also a support factor. So on the one hand, having the knowledge there is something I can do, empowering myself, and not being just a bystander and seeing how things developing here.
Mm. It's amazing. So we set the context to what you're doing, and you are solving a problem that I think is actually, because on the face of it, some people could say, "Oh, skin diseases. There's other diseases as well." But I know from people close to me how debilitating and psychologically it can really really affect people. But you don't just wake up one day and start a tech company, helping people with these skin diseases. So, how did all this come about? Because I know you were at Care Syntax, the head of development there before, a really well-known company in Berlin. So, what was it that led you to make this jump in the first place to start this?
Yeah, it was multiple things. So, going a little bit back to my studies, I've been always working in artificial intelligence and robotics. And then roughly 7 years, I switched from online marketing, and before I worked in banking in the healthcare sector, and started my career at Care Syntax, and was over this time building up teams. In different embedded system development, web development, and artificial intelligence again. And it was very interesting for me to work in healthcare, having no background in that before. It was interesting to help people, but also the technology is different than in other industries because of the regulatory affairs you have, but the impact you're generating is quite important. But what I really realized at Care Syntax was that doing something like machine learning, you have a lot of boundaries to pass if you're a company, because when you want to have access to data and do something good with that, you have a lot of steps in between you as a company being the technology provider and actually being at the point of care where the data is generated. And my personal motivation was to bring that technology to the good of the people. But it was, so in my time at Care Syntax, it took me more or less 2.5 years to get the contracts ready to be able to do that. And that was one of the reasons I was like, okay, after being for 5 years with Care Syntax, it's time to do something different, try out something on my own. And when I met Tobias and Reem, we discussed different ideas, and it was quite clear that if we want to have a big advantage in machine learning, specifically machine vision, it makes sense to think about a mobile application. And then if you look at all the different disease fields, you see that skin condition is something you can very, very nicely support with machine vision. And if you have a mobile device, you have a camera, and it makes sense to focus on that area. And then we went for a very much business-oriented approach and looked at the different target groups and realized what is the target group with a high affinity for using a mobile digital companion. And that's how we realized that atopic eczema is the first area to start, and then from there go step by step to other fields.
It's fascinating, but one thing that's curious to me, and you mentioned that you wanted to use this tech for good purposes, you wanted to make a difference with your skills. Where do you think that's come from? Because I mean, you could quite easily have set up, you could go into like fintech or e-commerce or whatever, both noble and very good industries. So where did that urge to use this tech for good purposes to make a difference to people's lives, do you think has come from?
I think it's an intrinsic motivation thing. So normally when you develop technology, you have a very much technology-focused view on the problem. But it's very much supportive if you bring the technology out to the people and then you get feedback that really somehow support them in their life. And if you go for fintech, you will rarely find a customer who's saying, wow, your technology changed my life. But we're getting emails and via our Facebook site, we're getting like messages saying, wow, I'm so glad that something like this exists in the market. And at the beginning, it was only a guess that will get reactions like that, but now we get that, and that's very supportive. And the good thing is that normally working in a kind of agile development mode, you always want to be close to your customer or to your user. And if you work in other industries, it's very hard to get that feedback. But if you're working in healthcare, people will definitely tell you what they're missing and what they need, and you get a way better understanding. And you, even if you're maybe not affected by the disease yourself, you get a very much good understanding by just talking to people and iterating with the product in the market. And I think this was very much motivating me to really see how technology can change people's life and be of an direct impact to their life. And and at the end of the day, you always want, if you build something, you want to see that it's used. And I saw that big opportunity in healthcare. And on the other side, having worked in other industries, I saw that healthcare itself is always a little bit lacking behind. So even if you just try to adopt technologies from other industries to healthcare, you have a high chance in making a difference there.
Yeah, I was going to ask that actually. Did you ever like meet with patients or people that have really benefited from your product?
Yeah, so how we actually started the whole product was we reached out to patients and we built up a small test panel of 10 patients. And at the beginning, we had no tech available. We just tried to mimic whatever we wanted to implement afterwards by ourselves. So we worked very much iteratively with our test panel here. And then when we went live, we got more and more support from new patients, and then we took the chance to get in touch with them and discuss ideas and just get feedback how the things we thought of really works in their daily life.
Do you think that's been like one of the keys to the success so far? Because a lot of people, a lot of founders will build something in its entirety and then look to get feedback and put it out there. It seems that you were building and getting feedback constantly, and it was a really short feedback loop. How important has that been in the development of this technology?
It's, I think, the most important thing. So if you build a product which is near to your user, you have to have the feedback. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And I think the second most important thing is you need to somebody have on the team with UI and UX experience. So because you should not fool yourself. You're building a product which will have only value if a user is using it. If you may be building a middleware or something very technical in between, it's totally fine to talk with other stakeholders. But if you have a user-focused product, you need to have that feedback. And more interestingly, in healthcare, where you can never really primarily guess how a user will use your software. So you build something and you have certain scenarios in your mind, but then you talk to the first user and they're saying, yeah, that doesn't work out for me. So one of the first things we learned, for example, was that taking a photo with your camera, we thought it might be very easy. And you have a small child and you take just photos of the skin, which is affected. And then the users told us, yeah, good luck with that. Your child will not stand still. So you need to somehow figure out the workflow in a different way. And that kind of feedback is very helpful to understand what kind of challenges, even with the software available, the users are still facing. And if you don't have that, there's a high chance that the users, even if you do, especially if you do mobile development, will download your app, try out, will dislike it, and will never come back to you and give you no feedback at all. So if you don't have a process involved getting the feedback proactively and somehow embrace a user, this valid feedback you will not hear about.
Every successful founder I speak to always says feedback, 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 get feedback. It's such a common theme and easily forgotten when you're caught up in the day to day. Easily forgotten. With this role now you have, and I'm sure there's crossover with your previous role in terms of similarities. How has your life changed going from a head of development to a co-founder in the past year?
Interesting. I would say that the management-related task having a bigger share of my daily work. Definitely, yes. It's also the decisions you're taking now have much higher influence because our company is, compared to Care Syntax, a lot smaller. So every decision you take has direct impact. So that's definitely something which changed. I have to be honest here. At my time at CareSyntax, I already had a great flexibility offered by the founders. So I was much doing my own decisions and defining the own pathway of our technology development. So that didn't change so much because I already had a great example before that. But yeah, the daily work is also a small setup. Of course, financing is an issue. I never cared about that much before, and now I have to. Yeah, so I guess having a more cross-functional role in the company, that's the biggest change I'm seeing here.
Mm. We'll come on to financing a little bit later because it's always so important and something everyone wants to find out about. But what about in kind of your lifestyle and your workload? Would you say you're working more now? Is it just working differently? How's the sort of work-life balance changed?
So I was always very committed to my tasks. So I would say my workload didn't change that much. Not saying that I was not working that much at CareSyntax time, so it was always on a high level, but always good because I'm like the things I'm doing. So that I would say is not changing that much. It's more about setting your own boundaries. So you're more and more in the position to be kind of the role model for the company. So how you define your workload, it definitely affects all your colleagues. So that's a little bit different. In terms of my personal life, I would say it hasn't changed so much. Of course, certain things keep you a lot of times more busy after your working hours than normal. Um, as I was saying, certain things which are more like strategy of the company, where you're heading to, what is your goal for the next 5 years? These kind of questions is a little bit from the broadness of scope. It has increased a lot, and it's harder to, shut that down after your workday has finished. So that's maybe the difference that private life and professional life gets a little bit more entangled these days.
I'd 100% agree with that. So I was, don't want to compare myself to you, but I was quite similar. I was in like a head of role, head of a division in a recruitment agency, and now I've started my own recruitment agency. And the one main difference I would say is that, yeah, the lines between work and life are massively blurred, and it's also a, a lot harder to switch off mentally sometimes to not think about the week gone by or the week going forward. But that's what I'm really trying at the moment, to really live in the moment, to not dwell on the past, not be anxious about the future, but be in the here and now. Easier said than done, though, I have to say.
I can imagine, yes.
um, so coming back to that financing, then, how? Because you co-founded the company, and you need to build a product, an app, and everything like that. You need to get the design right. This is all expensive stuff. Money in tech can be burned really, really quickly. So how did you go about financing the company?
So I would say we bootstrapped the company to a certain extent. So we put in our own money, and then we get some grants and attended a couple of competitions where we won also additional money. So that helped a lot. And right from the start, we went for a very lean approach, also in terms of hiring. So we thought about, we are a very nice cross-functional founder team. So what do we really need to extend our capabilities? And we didn't went for scalability first. We just thought about adding additional talent to the team. And that's why we hired somebody being specific in UI and UX development. And we got somebody on the tech side to support with certain areas of development. And that's our lean setup at the moment. And that helped us a lot to reduce cost, but still being able to bring the product forward. Nevertheless, we also, through our own network, had a couple of business angels around who, in an early stage, realized the potential of our product, and we got them on board. And at the moment, we are on the next step and raising a seed round for financing for the upcoming years.
Hmm. So coming back to that seed round then as well, a lot of people with seed funding and funding in general, it's all about the headline in TechCrunch, the post on LinkedIn, and it's a big moment for the company. But what goes on behind the scenes to try and get that seed round? Because I know from speaking to a lot of founders, it's a lot of paperwork, a lot of admin, and a lot of hard work.
Definitely, yes. And I think this is one of the things where we actually see also the pandemic having a big influence, because yeah, getting money in the market, it's at the moment more challenging. And we have even talked to some VCs saying that the market is currently on pause to a certain extent. So everything has to move differently compared to maybe the former years. I think right from the start, what we start with is you just talk with a lot of people, and we realize that healthcare is something a lot of VCs are intrigued in, but they're also not completely getting the bigger picture and don't understand completely how their pathway as a VC could work with that. So it's a lot of discussing, explaining how the market works, how the market potential can develop with your own product, and then when you have got a lot of admirers on that one, you have to work through the details, and then it's about your KPIs. And one of the biggest challenges we saw is that VCs who are not very much informed about healthcare business models, they try to apply KPIs from different industry to healthcare, and that's getting a lot of discussion. And then you have to work with VCs to come up with your own KPIs, which are fitting more to your business. And paperwork, of course, the due diligence is always part of it. But I think this is not very specific to healthcare. This is, I think, all over the place the same. And if you don't have experience with that, it takes a lot of time. But we're somehow in a good position, since I have a little bit of experience with that from tech side as Syntax, going through due diligence, and Tobias is managing all of that in a very, very good way, and has also experience from his former jobs how to do that. So I guess we are in a good position that we are not completely new to that game. Nevertheless, it takes a lot of time.
You mentioned your co-founder Tobias there. How do you feel you complement each other in terms of a skill set? Because one thing that is really important for companies starting out, and something that always gets mentioned, is you need to get the founding team right. Usually two co-founders, sometimes three. I spoke to someone once who had, for one of his companies, they had five co-founders.
Wow.
And it was just a complete mess. I mean, you wouldn't marry five people, would you? So I think the same can go in business. So how has that worked in terms of complementing each other's skills? And
so I think we three are a perfect match in this way, because Reem taking care of the clinical side of things, being a doctor working in healthcare with skin-related diseases, Tobias having the management background, and me having the tech. So I think if you think about orthogonality, it couldn't be better in any way. So that works perfectly out for us, bringing the different skill sets and having all the needed skill set in the founder team, especially. And on the other side, we are all intelligent enough to understand each other's way of working, and being understandable enough to get the things right. If you're running into a situation where we have to do a decision together. So I think one of the hardest things, even if you have orthogonality in your founder team, is then meeting on a common ground to discuss and make a decision together. And I think that is working very well. I think from a character perspective, we are fitting good together and having a very reasonable way of arguing with each other. And that's helping a lot. And I think, if I would draw up a role model, I think we're close to that.
it's so important to get that right and to have that complementation of skills. Um, in terms of your team now, then, how many is it? 6 employees now you have?
So it's 5 full-time and 1 part-time.
Okay. And is that remote, or is that based in Berlin?
That is mostly in Berlin. Only one person is remote working at the moment.
Okay. Do you have an office space? Is it a co-working space?
Yeah, so we've been very lucky. So when we got the grant, there's in Germany, this is called Exist program, which is coming from academia, and it's a subsidiary for a year. And within that, you also get a free office space. And we are currently so we are located in Berlin, and we're working together with the Charité and with the Freie University in Berlin. And our office space is at the venue of the Freie University. And there we have an office, which we can work together in.
Okay. One thing I know you've been in Berlin for like obviously a long time. Is it most of your life? I know you went to university in Berlin.
I have to count the years. I think it's not half of my life yet, but pretty close to. I went to Berlin for my studies. So now I've
Mm.
been there for nearly 16 years yet. Yeah, it's my home definitely.
How has Berlin changed in the last 16 years from someone who's been there a long time?
That's funny. I think always that to a certain extent the city went through the same phases compared to my personal life. So when I started my studies, it was everything a little mess, and it was fun time to be around. It was everything was cheap. It was a lot of students, people with alternative lifestyles, and then during the last 8 years, I definitely see that the city has grown up. There's still parts of it belonging to the nice old way of doing things, but there's also serious business now in the city. Everything gets a little bit more more structured, I would say. And I think what changed a lot is that Berlin is now a big business and career opportunity, and it wasn't back in the days. So back in the days was normally you went for your studies, you had a good time in Berlin, and then afterwards you went somewhere else for getting a real job.
I mean, it must have from like even just living there because I speak to software engineers who. So I relocate a lot of software engineers over to Berlin for various companies, and I remember one person. He said he turned up to a house viewing and there were 30 people viewing the house at the same time because everyone was just desperate to try and find accommodation. And he had like people crossing him on the stairs and stuff. He said, if you're looking for like especially like a family sort of flat or house, it can be an absolute nightmare. So, how is it from like a lifestyle point of view? Have you seen much changes there?
Of course, totally, yes. You had always, if you look at the map of Berlin, you have different areas, and every area is a little bit different also in terms of who's living there and how they're living there. And that migrates over time because people have the tendency when they come to Berlin, they choose an area and then they stick with this area, and then everything else develops around them. And that changed a lot. I think, yeah, looking for a flat or a house is a complete nightmare in Berlin. I can definitely say that. Um, but everything else, I think you have a lot of freedom in Berlin. You can still, even in pandemic times, a little bit less freedom than before. But whatever you really want to do, you can do. You will not be judged by anybody or in any ways.
Mm,
So I think the richness in Berlin comes from the fact that everybody is free to do what they want and how they want to live their life, and that's definitely shaping the city still. But yeah, the I can say related to other cities, Berlin gets more and more on the same level. I think compared to Paris. I think looking in Paris for a flat is the same issue. Um, so that kind of structure is building up more and more. And of course, the
mm,
lifestyle is also adapting to it. You have still, or you used to have a big night night out oriented parties in Berlin. That's changed a little bit. But yeah, whatever you want to do, it's definitely still happening. Going out for a brunch or strolling through the city, having just a good time, that still works.
mm. One of my interesting you say that one of my first meetings in Berlin, the recruiter there said, you know, Berlin is a city where you can be whoever you want to be, and you won't get judged. And I really do feel that people, even from like a business point of view, because I used to recruit into the London market, and in London, it's all transactional. No one really gives a shit about you. It's just the way it is. But in Berlin, people were so welcoming, and it really made an effort. I remember one time I had a meeting with someone, and I just mentioned, "Oh, I'm going to take this candidate out for dinner tonight, so I need to have a look at the restaurants." And then I get back, and she sent me an email of a massive list of all the different restaurants to go to, and yeah, you wouldn't get that in London. um, so yeah, everyone has been completely welcoming. It'll be interesting to see how the city develops because in terms of like funding and money, I don't think there's been any city in the world, maybe Silicon Valley, that has had so much money in such a short space of time. Like some of the funding rounds insane, like hundreds and hundreds of millions of euros coming into the city. What do you think it will be like when? Do you think there's a danger where investors will start to think, "Oh, I need a return on this now"? Um, do you think it could be like a bubble that could pop at all, or like at least readjust?
Of course, I think this challenge is there. But looking all over Europe, I'm still of the opinion that Berlin has the highest potential for being in this digital realm um, in a good position. I think also compared all over Germany, Berlin has a very different way. This is why so many people all over the globe are attracted by Berlin. So a lot of talent is flowing into the city, and I don't see this stopping in the foreseeable future. And as long as this is maintained, investors are willing to invest, because if you have all that kind of talent in the city available, you can build up great businesses with that. And that's, I think, the main reason why investors would invest anywhere. So I don't see that at the moment being a real risk to Berlin. I don't also see no other city in Europe being on the same level, because most of the cities have been much further developed in the past already, and there was not so much potential left. And Berlin was really, what I was saying 16 years ago, there was nothing in terms of business, so to say, no industry, nothing around. And that kind of potential has now been taken over by the digital market. And there might be the point where investors will look for a new place, and the bubble might break, but I think we're still years away from that.
Yeah, it's quite a unique case in that regard, isn't it? Because I mean, even when I first ever went to Berlin, I flew into Berlin Schönefeld Airport, and I landed, and we're going through the passport control, and I was like, "Really? Like, this is the capital city of Germany, like one of the world's biggest powers, and this is its airport." And it got a bit better as I got the train in, and I know now they finally built the new airport, and it's open now in Tegel. So I'd be interested to see how that develops as well. But even seeing like big names like Elon Musk is opening the Gigafactory in Berlin as well. So it's definitely now got like a worldwide presence. And I think, yeah, you're quite right in terms of, I suppose I keep comparing London, but it's my sort of vantage point. London tech definitely doesn't have the potential of growth as Berlin does, just space and then money and infrastructure and everything like that. I think it's it's an exciting time, and it'd be interesting to see how the next 10 years unfolds in Berlin. Do you think you'll keep the company in Berlin for a long time?
Yes. So our plan is to scale up in different indications fields, and that's being in Berlin, being close to the Charité is definitely a win for us. And also our network now all over Germany. It doesn't really matter if we're somewhere else, so why not stay in Berlin? And in terms of tech recruitment, it's one of the best places around. So yeah, Berlin is definitely our place to stay for the upcoming years. We still have the plans to migrate, so to scale up internationally all over Europe, and of course also in the US. And I guess if we hit that spot, we have to think about also maybe relocating part of the company to the US, because it's not working out in healthcare to be a foreign company trying to get into the American market. And yeah, but that's a little bit more down the road.
Mm. Gives a peek into your ambition, though. Does give a peek into your ambition. You could relocate to, apparently Austin in Texas is like the next big tech hub in America. Apparently everyone's leaving California now. Everyone's leaving Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
which is so expensive.
interesting enough, I think Boston is kind of big in healthcare.
Mm.
So yeah, with Care Syntax, we did a lot of work together with people in Boston. Um, let's see how everything moves on with that. Also, I guess we are all getting a little bit more acquainted to remoteness and work remote together. But nevertheless, yeah, at one point, being close to your market is always important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Part of the reasons why I did this podcast, actually, got to be close to people. There was one thing I was really keen to pick your brains on. So we've talked a lot about using tech for good, and you're definitely doing that. There's no doubt about that, and it's come from you as an intrinsic motivation. What concerns do you have with the advancement of technology? of it falling into the hands of bad actors. Where do you think is the biggest concern for technology to be used for negative or bad things?
Well, I think talking these days about technology and the risks, we always end up with artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think what we're seeing is that we have a lot of power with these tools available. But let's think about every technology we have developed over the last 500 years. It was always ambiguity involved. So you can use something for good or for the bad. And somehow we figured that out always with laws in place, but also with a moral compass, so to say. I'm I'm seeing that the technology we're developing at the moment has great benefits, but I think we're also doing a good way of putting it in check to a certain extent. We have to be at the moment what I'm seeing in terms of data privacy that we're going a little bit towards the other edge of the scope, which might at least in Europe hit our technology development harder than we would love to see that compared to other countries. But I think the tendencies is good that politicians are talking about these things, that there is more and more understanding about technology. I think the biggest risk we're seeing here is that having complex technology available and then that only maybe a minority is really understanding what it means and the majorities just managing expectations based on that. That's a big risk. And what I'm seeing at the moment is that more and more communication is happening and people understand better what does artificial intelligence at the moment even mean. It's not really about intelligence, it's about doing something more efficient than a human being can do, and thinking about this technology not as a religion, more like a set of tools, and we will adapt to the tools. I think the biggest risk I'm seeing here is actually that the speed of the development compared to the decades before is that the advancement of technology is much, much faster compared to all the decades before. So there might be the problem that we as human beings are not able to adapt as fast as technology. And I'm not sure how we mitigate that at the moment.
Yeah, it seems now, especially with AI, that it's like exponential growth almost. And I mean, the things that the machine learning algorithms can do now in the last 10, if you compare to the last 10 years, it's just insane. I've spoken on the podcast before about GPT-3, where like a language tool by OpenAI, where it's basically like writing essays or blogs or news articles that seem like they're written by a human. And then the implications for that, for social media, for fake news, could potentially be quite damaging. Don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, I think what we've seen here is that, of course, the tools are used and there's a lot of experimenting around. You still, if you really look and have a deeper look into technology, you will always see where the borders are currently. And real intelligence is not there yet. It's more or less pattern reapplication. So if you say about writing text, it's not like new invented text. It's just old text and then readapted, and it looks for you. If you don't have the view on all the other text which was used for the learning before, it looks to you new. And maybe you can also claim that for a lot of authors out there who are also more or less copying from other authors. But um, thinking about, I think what we as human beings are doing a lot of time, we're extrapolating from what we're currently seeing, and then we think, what are the next steps technology can go to? And I would be a little bit more constrained about that. But just because what we're currently seeing, the technology doesn't work in the way that you can just extrapolate and then get more and more out of that, which really would need a real intelligence. It's mostly about efficiency. You do things you can do your own in a much more efficient way, but you don't invent something new. And that's why I'm seeing that also our social media and so on, if there has been copy paste done already by humans, okay, now technology will do that. But that's why I'm not really seeing a risk here. It's more on a different scale. And then at the end of the day,
Mm,
it's more us as users, how we adapt to that and how we accept it. I think if we would maybe
mm,
be more curious about what we're reading in social media, we would even understand that this is not real news anymore. But I think on the other hand, we are lazy. We like to consume the stuff we're seeing there, and we don't even question it anymore. But this tendency is independent of artificial intelligence.
mm. I suppose it comes back to if AI is like augmenting what we do and supplementing what we do, there'll be good people that use it to make them do more of the good stuff, and then there'll be bad people who use it to make them do more of the bad stuff. I suppose that's what it comes down to eventually.
Of course, but this is what has happened to all technologies in the past. You can always use it in both ways, and it's our responsibility as a society to define what are the boundaries we not want to pass here.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll definitely wrap up soon. I appreciate you've got a very busy day ahead of you, and then we're doing this first thing on a Monday morning. But there's one thing I wanted to ask. I don't want it to seem like an interview question because I know a lot of people will interview with companies and say, "Oh, where do you want to be in 5 years?" But I always like to take the longer term view. Where do you want to be like, or in 30 years' time, when you assess your life and you look back, and you look back at this company, there might be future companies, I don't know. How do you want it to look, and what sort of impact would you want to have made?
Wow, that is a tough question. I definitely would like to look back and see that the technology I was involved in building and bringing to the market really made a difference. I think healthcare is a good way of doing that. And I think 30 years of lifespan, that is, I think, a normal turnaround for healthcare as well. So it might fit that in 30 years, we will really see the outcome of the things we do at the moment. And yeah, I would also love to see that maybe we bring healthcare to another level. So I think machine learning AI is already a good start, but I see also the advancement of robotics, and I would definitely see myself involved in that in a decade or now from now, and bring maybe the technology we're building today together with more advancements in the future. And yeah, I would love to see that happening, and see that we really come to the level that digitalization of healthcare brings not only costs to the system, which we have to see a lot at the moment, but we also see that we're really generating benefit from an economic perspective as well.
Do you ever have do ideas ever pop into your head, like other business ideas, and you think, oh, I could probably do that maybe in 10, 20 years' time once I've done this?
Yeah, of course, there's always ideas flying around, but I don't plan that far ahead because I'm just realizing that technology is advancing so fast. It doesn't make sense to think now about something you want to do in 10 years, because if you're in 10 years, it's most probably somebody else has already done it. So I'm keeping my eyes open to see what might be nice ideas for the future, but I don't have that big a vision at the moment.
Okay, super interesting. There's one last thing as well, because I come from, so my background is like recruitment agency in London, and if you listen to a lot of, so there's podcasts out there that interview recruitment agency owners, and similar to this, how did you build the company and things like that, and giving advice to people who want to start their own recruitment agency. So similar to this, but obviously with tech companies. But one thing that dominates the conversation in those sorts of podcasts and interviews is money. Recruitment agents in London love talking about money. They love talking about how much money they made. And it almost frames the whole conversation and frames why you do a lot of things. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of recruitment agencies and the industry in general has an incredibly bad name, especially in Europe. We haven't mentioned the word money once in this podcast. How important is it to you, and how sort of motivated are you by it?
Yeah, that's again a different question, or a difficult question, so to say, because I would say that money itself is not motivating me that much. I was saying at the beginning of our conversation that I was very much motivated by getting feedback from users and seeing that the technology I'm helping to build really makes a difference. On the other hand, if you want to see your own value in society, I think money is a good way of measuring that. So if somebody is willing to spend money out of their own pocket for something you build or for some services you provide, then it's a very, very nice way of defining your own value. And from that perspective, I see money being very helpful to myself to see where I'm standing and if I'm doing something right or not. So money as a metric, I would say, yes, it's important.
Yeah, always good to keep score with it. But yeah, it's really interesting because it's one of the key differences. I don't know whether it's like a Berlin thing as well, but people don't like to talk about money as much than in London. I don't know why that's the thing. I find with I actually found with like European candidates, whether it's like German or Eastern European or whatever, they really don't like to talk about sort of salaries or if I have a candidate who's getting an offer, I'm like, oh, so if they offered you, X amount, would you potentially go for it, or is that more than what you're on at the moment? And they're like, well, let's just see, what happens, and they really don't like to talk about it. As with sometimes I remember in London, I'll be like, right, Alex, get me 60,000, and I'll accept, and I'll sign, and I'll start Monday or whatever. So it's probably a bit more hard nosed. What's your perception of so as a CTO? I'm sure you get approached a lot about like outsourcing and recruiting, and like a lot of spam on LinkedIn. So what are your perception of like recruitment agencies and outsourcing tech companies as well? Because I'm sure that's probably the two main people that approach you.
Yeah, that has been a topic for a long time at Syntax Times, and of course now in my own company as well. The problem is that there are some very good people in the market doing really good recruitment, headhunting for the right people, but there's a lot of people who don't have that talent, so to say. And the problem is if you get an email or a call, you really don't know who you're talking to. And the other problem is that just the pure volume, the less good recruiters are having more calls with you than the good ones. And that creates somehow a bias. So every time somebody calls you and you don't know the number, and there's always the same phrase at the beginning of the conversation, you're already in the mode like, oh no, I don't want to really talk to you, and which is creating an issue. And it's hard to balance. So I'm not 100% sure how we as a industry will take over this problem. I think we still need work with recruiters a lot. I think no small business is able to have people dedicated to recruiting the market. And also candidates are more willingly to talk with good recruiters to get them their next job. It's just about reach and scalability. But at the moment, what you're saying is the truth, that you get a lot of calls you don't want to answer really, which is limiting your own way of scaling up your teams, and it's taking time from yourself. So I'm not sure how would be the next step. So what we're currently doing is since we wanted to be very lean and small, we did our initial recruitment ourselves. But now for the next year, we are looking proactively for potential partners, and we don't react to calls. So we are looking in the market and see who we want to work with, and then we reach out to them. Again, this takes more time from us, but we see this as a very nice filtering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's always the best way to do it. With my best clients and my best business in Berlin has always been from referrals or people getting in touch with me because they're serious, and it's always worked out as the most efficient way of doing things. I think as well with recruiting, it's difficult. One of the challenges is you don't know how good a recruiter is until you've actually started working with them, until they've sort of sent you people. And with GDPR as well, it's hard to kind of say, oh, I've got these people and stuff. You can't sort of share data, so it's a huge challenge that I don't think will go away for a long time. We will wrap up soon, I promise. I know I've said that like 3 times. But if you had one bit of advice for a head of or a software engineer or a tech lead who has an idea like you did and wanted to build on that and start a company, what one bit of advice would you give them?
Honestly, I would give two advices. On the one hand, saying find yourself good co-founders with different talents. That's very much more important, not only from an external perspective, also for having your internal discussions. And the second thing, go to market quickly. As a tech person, you strive normally for having maybe higher quality or more ripeness of your product before you go to market, but you're missing all the feedback. And if you have good partners, more business related than yourself in your co-founder team, then they will give you the right advice to go to market quickly and see the bigger picture sooner than you, and you should listen to them.
Well, Oliver, thank you so much for your time and for coming on and sharing your wisdom. I had a lot of fun. We'll definitely do this again sometime, maybe in a few years when you've taken over the US and the whole world, and we'll see how things have gone.
Cool. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Building Our World podcast. To show your support and to stay up to date, then be sure to hit that subscribe button. Until then, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.